So welcome to the fourth unit of the Teacher Training Toolkit Multilingual Resources for Primary Schools in the Gambia. What we're going to focus on here is language attitudes, education and multilingualism. So hopefully this video will help you think about solutions on how to tackle certain language attitudes which might not be fruitful in the context of education. So we'll start by reflecting on this idea of monolingual mindsets. I'll say a few words as well about African language activism in relation to developing, for example, African languages to talk about maths and science more generally. And also, we'll explore language attitudes and how to challenge them. Some of you might remember that in the second unit when I talked about what the options are in terms of language of instruction, in terms of which languages are used to develop early literacy and also which languages are used as academic subjects, I had in red one of the options was, always, not to integrate African languages. So here I'm going back to this to some extent, and I'm asking, okay, when African languages are not used, what is it telling us? And the first thing that's worth mentioning here is that it's evidence of a monolingual mindset, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is paradoxical because we're talking about countries which are characterized by a high degree of linguistic diversity. I mean, if you take Ghana, for example, it's got 80 languages, and 9 languages are currently meant to be used in primary education, etc. Now, I just want to unpack this idea of monolingual mindset a little bit. So if people are not used to speaking several languages, then they might have a monolingual mindset. And that is, they will think that monolingualism is the norm, and their solutions, therefore, to language-related issues will be based on their monolingual experience of the world. This doesn't make us bad people, but it sometimes makes us unable to understand the experiences of multilingual speakers or communities. The reason why I'm saying us here is because, strictly speaking, for example, I've grown up a little bit in French Guiana, that is multilingual, but really I've mostly been educated and grown up in an environment that's monolingual. So such a mindset is more frequently found in France and the UK, for example, because speaking more than one language is not as widespread as in the Gambia. But there are a few important facts to bear in mind, though. The first one is that now it's widely accepted that more than half of the world's population is multilingual, but that many high-income countries are largely informed by a monolingual mindset. And this shows in some of their policies, education projects, etc. So, for example, I recently met 2 mothers on separate occasions in the UK, and and they shared the same thing. They'd been told by staff at the nursery of their children that somehow they shouldn't speak. That they shouldn't speak their language to their children. What this also means is that education policies, projects, initiatives, and so on and so forth, which emanate from those countries, often assume monolingualism to be the norm. And some of these projects obviously are used in sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm trying to unpack here why we have evidence of a monolingual mindset sometimes in education initiatives, policies, programs, etc. in the highly linguistically diverse countries of Africa. Now that was the first point I wanted to mention here. what this is also showing us when African languages are, are not used in education, is that it shows us certain beliefs about language. So, for example, people wrongly believe that English is more suitable than African languages to educate. We'll go back to this a bit later, why it's wrong. It also reflects certain beliefs about language learning. Again, people wrongly believe that African children will learn English better if it is used as a language of instruction. Now, that's something that I've touched upon previously, namely the fact that if learners learn in the language that they understand, they will do better in all subjects, including the learning of an additional language. We've just talked about instances when African languages are invisible in education, and I want to talk now about people who have tried to address this. So many people and institutions have highlighted that we should invest effort in making African languages more visible in education, but in other prestigious domains as well. And I want to take this view that African languages cannot be used to teach maths as a starting point to talk about African language activism here. So you can see, which obviously is wrong, but you can see that yes, it's true. The observation that mathematics registers are often poorly developed in African languages can't really be argued with. But if I think it's worth thinking of why this is. Does it necessarily mean that African languages therefore are not suitable to teach maths? So let's look at some of the reasons. Some of the reasons for this kind of beliefs is language hierarchies. So because people think that, for example, European languages are superior to African languages, therefore they have refrained from using African languages to teach maths. Now, if you are to dig this a little bit further, you can go back to colonial language ideologies. Why might some people think that African languages are somehow inferior? It's because of colonial language ideologies which have survived independence. Another reason, by the way, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but another reason for this state of affairs is that English dominates quite often, or European languages, depending on where you are in Africa, continue to dominate teacher training. So therefore, you can see how teachers may therefore be reluctant to teach mathematics in the languages that might be that they might know better than English, or whichever language is the main language of instruction, because they themselves would have been taught in a different language. Now, there have been attempts, however, to develop scientific terminology in African languages, so that which shows that mathematics can be taught in African languages. What it requires, however, is resources and so on and so forth. So I'm just giving two very brief examples here. So the Académie Malienne des Langues, which is the Malian Academy of Languages, has, for example, done work on standardizing and expanding the lexicon to accommodate the lexicon of Bambara, to accommodate modern and technical terms. More recently, and this is a project involving several countries as well as Google, so I think it was goes back to 2022, and it's called Decolonize Science. So that project was about promoting cultural ownership of science, and the starting point was to translate in 6 African languages, 180 articles, if I remember well. So if you click, by the way, when you've got text like this in blue and underlined in the PDFs, if you click on it, then you can go to the article. So the AfricArXiv is, contains these articles, but contains also, it's an open source platform that contains a lot of resources from African scholars. We're moving on to the topic of language attitudes. So we've already actually talked about a few language attitudes, so namely the idea that certain languages are superior to others, or the idea that African languages aren't suitable to teach maths. But what do we mean by language attitudes? So language attitudes are beliefs. They're not facts. They're beliefs about language. They're beliefs about speakers of certain languages. And we believe them to be true, although there's no scientific basis for them. What's tricky is that, very often we actually believe that, they seem so common sense that we believe they are facts, but they are not. So I'm giving you examples here of such beliefs. So we wrongly think, for example, that certain accents or languages are beautiful or ugly or sound good or sound bad, or that certain people, because of the way they speak, we wrongly assume that they are intelligent or not intelligent, trustworthy, untrustworthy. Um, we referred to early on as well, another kind of language attitude would be the idea that certain languages are better suited to carry knowledge than others, and that's certainly one of the beliefs that seems to have circulated in Africa for quite some time, is that somehow European languages are better suited to carry knowledge. So all these are beliefs, they're not facts, and they cause all sorts of problems. They, for example, prevent certain people from getting certain jobs. Some people might be, and this is, what I'm mentioning here is backed up by research. So it's showing, for example, that depending on their accent, some people may be more or less likely to be convicted of a crime, to be accepted as tenants for a house, etc., etc. So here what I do is I focus on some problematic beliefs, and I try to suggest ways in which we might want to challenge them. So the first one, I've heard this one a lot, and here, I mean, I've heard it a lot among Africans from a range of different African countries, both from the diaspora but also in Africa. So this idea that multilingualism in Africa is a problem for education, and that therefore using a European language is good for it's because it makes things easy, or sometimes it's presented as being good because it allows you to achieve unity, etc. So all this is widely written about in academic literature. But here, if you take this statement, why does it need to be perceived as a problem? Why not see multilingualism as a resource? I'm not going to focus on this too much, because obviously this is precisely what's driving the teacher training toolkit. So this idea that multilingualism can actually be an incredible resource. The second statement here is that it's better to use English because it is a neutral language. Again, this kind of belief you can link to colonialism. So during colonization, a lot of time and energy was invested on the part of colonizers to convince African populations that somehow the European language was the language of unity. Again, I haven't got time to go over history, but some of those beliefs somehow have lingered. Mathematical concepts can't be expressed in African languages. We've looked at this in the previous slide. Well, here's simply, there is a lot of evidence showing that this is simply not true. And I've got a colleague, for example, in my department who's done work work on this. She's from South Africa. Her name is Sarah Black. So it is also costly to implement. That's something that's often mentioned as well. So it is costly to implement multilingual teaching approaches. Again, there are some inexpensive solutions. So again, this is this is not true. I could go on, but I think I just wanted to show in practice how, how we might go about challenging some of those beliefs. Now, why are language and attitudes so difficult to challenge? I've tried, I thought about this and I thought, how could I convey why that is? And I think, I'm fairly happy with what I'm suggesting here is that, good people have these beliefs, even though they are wrong. You may be watching this video and hold some of these beliefs. It's a bit like when I teach to my students and we talk about stereotypes, it's very, it's impossible to say that one, doesn't, isn't doing anything or thinking anything that's informed by stereotypes. We live by stereotypes. So, good people have these beliefs. The other thing as well, which is important from our point of view, is that some of these good people will be people responsible for education in government. So they might be making policy, they might be developing teacher training or curriculum, etc. And also, and I've already hinted at this a bit early on when I said that some of these beliefs seem common sense, is that some of these beliefs are shared by a large number of people. And that makes it hard to change people's minds. So I think that's some of the main reasons why they're so difficult to challenge. What I want us to do here is to focus on what some of what we've just mentioned might mean at the level of institutions, particularly important institutions such as the British Council and and other large institutions which have an impact on language education. So here, if you look at the first bullet point, it's in reference to the past. So although it says the quote is from 2019, it's referring to what was happening, prior to 2013. So what the quote is saying here is that their view in the past was that learning needed to happen through one language. So what this is showing is clear evidence, either an international language such as English or a national language. But you can see here that the mindset was clearly monolingual. Now, if you fast forward to 2013, there was a sort of U-turn where the British Council then decided that from then on, they would support English as a language in addition to the languages spoken by individuals. And then it goes on to say a bit later that it is English in the context of multilingualism that we wish to promote, not English as a dominant or domineering language. Now, so this is now the position of the British Council, and I'm hoping that you're all appreciating that. Wow, there's been a shift in terms of how they're now positioning English, and there's no longer an evidence of clear evidence of a monolingual mindset, but on the contrary, a realization that English is coexisting with other languages, and that it's a bit foolish to consider it in isolation from those other languages. But as suggested by the British Council again, they're emphasizing, so in the same publication, that it is not always easy for parents, teachers, etc. to change what they've believed for generations. And I think that's definitely something worth us taking time to think about, considering what we're interested in, so namely language in education in the Gambia. So we've come to the conclusion for this unit. So I'm hoping that that you're all thinking, you've all been actively thinking about what your beliefs about language are. As educators, I think it's worth you questioning your beliefs about language, but also about language in education, how you feel language or languages should feature in education. Very often, failures to integrate local languages in education in African countries and other post-colonial contexts can be linked to language-related beliefs among parents, but not only. In some cases, and understandably so, people who might be responsible, for example, for drafting education policy or policies or developing curriculum, etc., might have beliefs which are at odds with the view that African languages are equal to European languages, and therefore if they're not supportive of this view, then they will not think that African languages are worthy carriers of knowledge, or that they deserve budgets, for that matter, to be adequately developed. So it is wrong. I just want to emphasize that language language attitudes are wrong because they're not based on facts. They're based on beliefs. If you take the statements on the slide here, so this is not pure Jola, Mandinka, or Sarahule. This is Kaukau, Olof. English is more suitable than African languages to teach. Why is this wrong? Well, again, because they're beliefs, not facts. But what's interesting is that people contradict each other. So if I take Olof, for example, Wolof, different people will have different opinions of what pure what pure Olof is, or at least that's what I've observed. So I'll leave this here. Same as usual, make sure that you do the activity. Some of the resources will really, if you're interested, will allow you to delve a bit deeper into language attitudes, and same as ever, use the tell us section, answer the question, or if you want to share something different, then please do so. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and see you in the next unit.